welcome to SAP TechEd 2021 Dev 162, Developing Enterprise-Grade Mobile Apps and Mobile Experience. My name is Jitendra Kansal. I'm Product Manager for the Mobile Development Kit, and I'm here joined by my colleague, Froelich, who will be going through the Mdk Hands-On Exercise that we have for the session. So for today's agenda, we will cover the mobile services overview and see what are the options mobile services offers for developing mobile applications. And then we have a dedicated hands-on exercise on Mdk that will be covered by my colleague. So this slide explains SAP's strategy for the intelligent enterprise. SAP Business Technology Platform is the foundation of the intelligent, sustainable enterprise, which allow customers and partners to build new solution, extend and integrate the existing solution, and connect system and people. I want to briefly talk about our low-code, no-code offering that was announced in TechEd keynote. And if you see here, it covers three main areas. So for the process automation, we offer SAP workflow management that enables citizen developers to easily build workflows. And there's also SAP Intelligent RPA, robotic process automation that helps citizen developers to automate the task. And on top of that, there's SAP process automation that bring no-code process automation to the next level. Right. On the right side, what you see is application composition. So we recently launched SAP App Driver and the new functionality in SAP Business Application Studio that helps in accelerating application development. So SAP App Driver allow citizen developers to build highly sophisticated application or extension without writing a single line of code. And with the introduction of a low-code perspective in the SAP business application, professional developers can simplify their app development journey. And so for today's hands-on exercise, we will cover Mobile Development Kit, which is part of our low-code tooling, and see how it simplifies the app development journey. Right. And the third area of low-code, no-code offering is digital experience. So we are offering SAP Workzone, SAP Launchpad, SAP Mobile Start that helps driving the employee productivity and make newly built app available to everyone in the company. And all these three areas are covered by core services, for example, SAP Mobile Services. Right. Let's take a step back and understand how traditionally enterprise mobile solution have been built, right? So enterprise mobile solution exists since many years. Our customer have been building it, and those mobile solution were built with point-to-point connections where mobile devices connected either via enterprise Wi-Fi or a cable to the backend, and there was one expert who was able to develop and support such a solution. Right. What happened in last couple of years is more and more mobile devices enter into the enterprise world, and through those devices, the aim was to bring more and more data from to those devices. Right. So now we are more and more backend bring the data, and what has built up is the web of point-to-point connection. Right, and such a web of point-to-point connection brings challenges, right, for the administrator in terms of security. Okay, who is accessing what data, how data is traveling, what data gets stored on what device, right? And of course, the support is also critical here. So when solution is not known, and if IT is not aware of solution, then it's impossible to support the solution in case if they get any support request, right? And there's also challenges from the developers, because now developer needs to understand each backend in order to how to authenticate it. What are the API to access the data from the backend? And of course, because there are more and more devices, so they need to support various devices factor, device operating system, and how to basically authenticate from the client, how to store the data, how to exchange the data, with the backend. And last but not least, for the end user, of course, the user experience is a challenge. And if they stuck in an issue, then whom to contact. So those challenges have been seen in those traditional enterprise mobile solution. And this is where SAP Mobile Services come into play. The first thing we do is we decouple the web of point-to-point connection and put mobile services into the center where IT has full control. And if you see here, right-hand side, it has the building blocks, the microservices, for example, logging, analytics, app update, push, and tracing, which are part of the mobile services and where IT can use, leverage those features in order to operate and support mobile solution at the enterprise level, right? So with the help of these building blocks, admin can now configure who can access what data and what level of authentication required for the each backend, right? And for the developer, you see the left side, we provide the SDKs, and depending on the requirement, you can build a micro application, a cross-platform application, or a multi-channel application, or native application, right? There is standard protocol to access the backend, right? And through this SDK, the security is handled centrally. So as a developer, you don't need to worry about it at all. And from the end user, right, this is a win situation, and they can leverage single sign-on, and if they get stuck in an issue, then they can call up the IT, and then IT can look into the tracing for the user and then help in solving the problem, right? And so the solution built on SAP Mobile Services using this SDK bring a unified user experience for the end user. This is very critical, right? So this is all about mobile services overview. And then let me briefly talk about these development options one by one and see and what are their benefits and the capabilities. So let's start with SAP Mobile Card. Yeah. So SAP Mobile Card, sorry, SAP Mobile Card allow you to mobilize the key business information in form of a wallet or password style applications, where the end user access and interact with that information in a responsive and a native manner. You might be using a similar functionality on your iOS device in Apple Wallet or Android equivalent wallet, where you can store the boarding pass, a movie ticket, or reward points, right? And those functionalities for the consumer world, and SAP Mobile Card is for the enterprise world. And if we look at the capabilities that the SAP Mobile Card offers, right? So the card has both sides, like front and back side, so you can store the information on both the side of the card. And once the card comes into the deck and the client, it's offline. That means the data on the card is always accessible. And there's a good feature here. There's a background sync or auto refresh, so that the data on the card is always up to date, right? It has a native integration with the apps like Map, SMS, phone. So you can leverage the device native features in this scenario, right? And coming to the use case for the mobile card, for example, simple approval. So when you have a requirement to build an app with 1 or 2 pages, then a mobile card could be a good use case where you can have a simple approval card for the purchase order approval, leave request approval, deal approval, right? Or you can also build a card where you could show some company news, alert, sales promotion. You can also have a card with having information with time sheet, the payslip details, right? Again, here, the mobile card allow you to quickly mobilize the key business information, right? And to build such a card, the required skill set is HTML5 and CSS. So you can reuse your web skills to build a solution on top of mobile cards. We have the mobile development kit. So mobile development kit MDK provides you the ability to build multi-channel applications, which means you can build and maintain a single application that runs natively on mobile device, so Android and iOS, and also in the web browser as an online app. Mobile development kit is based on metadata driven model, meaning you define your application in pages, actions, logic as a metadata. And to develop MDK applications, we provide visual editor in Business Application Studio on Cloud Foundry, and so where you can drag and drop the control on the page and then build the UI quickly. So as you see in the screenshot, we also provide the local development support, the Mdk extension in Visual Studio Code. So You can also do the local development for the Mdk. Mdk allow you to develop application for both online and offline use cases. It allow you to extend application like SAP Asset Manager that runs on Mdk. And so the application that you develop then deploy to the cloud and then consume by a mobile client. And so you will learn more about this Mdk in the hands-on exercise and see how this works end to end. One of the beauty of Mdk is simplifying the life cycle, right? Because one requirement for the enterprise software is like you often need to handle the change request, right? And whether it's coming from business or the end user, and in order to avoid full life cycle, deployment, signing the code, distributing the app, Mdk simplify the app development, and so with this you can quickly push the changes to the field so that your end users get the up-to-date information. Right, and then so Mdk is suitable when you have a use case to build cross-platform, Android or iOS, or even multi-channel application also to the web, right? And if you have a requirement that when your app will be available for the customization, then Mdk should be your first choice. Right, it provides a native look and feel, offline capabilities, and then it provides both low-code environment and the pro-code environment, right? So this is all about Mdk. And the next option we provide is native SDKs. So SAP BTP SDK for iOS and SAP BTP SDK for Android. Right. So for iOS SDK, is the goal here is to build, enhance, and extend for the iOS capabilities. This is a Swift-based SDK which provides a framework or component that you can pick and choose to suit your requirement, right? For example, there are components that you can use to integrate with the platform, business technology platform, for Odata access, for the UI controls, for the onboarding, right? And this SDK comes with the tooling that the developers can easily ramp up. So the tooling like SDK Assistant, right? This is a standalone Mac application that can install on local machine. So you can use Assistant to generate app scaffolding to connect to the mobile services and to the backend, which generate the proxy classes. At the end, you will get an Xcode project, and then you can customize that project according to your requirement. It also comes with a Fiori Mentors for iOS application. This is an application on iPad where developer and designer can look into the available Fiori controls and then tweak those controls according to need, and then it will generate in Swift code that can be used for your application, and then you can further enhance and extend your iOS applications. Similarly, we have capabilities for the SDK for Android, and this comes with as a plugin to the Android Studio. And similar capabilities, it also comes with a tooling that developers can easily ramp up with. So SDK widget, which help in creating the similar app scaffolding and generating an Android project in Java Kotlin. And there's also a Fiori Mentor application for the Android where designer and developers can look into and then tweak the settings and generate the Java Kotlin page sample code and then use in their the Android project, right? So coming to when you can use SDKs, again, this depends, right? If you have instant access to the device innovation, then or if you need the native framework, and if you have iOS or Android skills to build such applications, right, then SDK, this native SDK can be useful. So if you have any question regarding these topics, please post in the chat, and we will be happy to answer it there. And with this note, I would like to hand it over to my colleague, Bill, to cover the Ndk Hands-On Exercise and show us what you have.
So for the remainder of the session, we will be going through the hands-on exercises, which will be building upon Mdk to build a mobile development kit application and then enhance that with additional features and functionality using the Mdk tooling. So before we jump into the actual hands-on, let me just take a minute to talk about the end-to-end architecture of the tooling that we're using here for this session. So as a developer, we will use the Business Technology Platform and more specifically the Business Application Studio as our design time environment. And this is our low-code environment for creating our applications using the visual editors, as well as the ability to create our rules using JavaScript or the visual tooling as well. The application will be developed, and then we will deploy that to both mobile services as well as the Mdk web runtime, so that we have a multi-channel delivery mechanism for our final application. And we will then, our end user will use the mobile client that's available on the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store on their mobile devices to access the application, or they can use their browser on their desktop to access the web version. From a connectivity perspective, our Mdk applications can consume either corporate data sources on-premise or in the cloud. They can also consume internet data sources and combine those together into a single application. So we'll be touching on the entire landscape here, starting as a developer, building our application, deploying it out, and then running it on our 3 platforms as an end user here. For those people that are following along, we will be using the clients from the App Store. So you can go ahead and install those on your device, and any web browser should work for the web client there. Okay. For the hands-on exercises themselves, all of the exercises and the steps are covered in the GitHub repository for this session. That repository can be accessed at github.com/SAP samples TechEd 2021-dev162, which is our session ID. And we'll take a look at that session repository in just a second. During the exercises here, we've got 5 exercises that we're going to be going through. The first one we will use to create our base application. That will be done using one of the Mdk templates that's available in Business Application Studio. And then we will proceed to enhance that application, and we'll go ahead to add what we'll call a bottom navigation screen to that, so that we have multiple sections of the application for easy navigation by our users. We'll then enhance the customer detail page to use tabs so that we can display multiple sections of data. And we'll display the address and then the sales orders specific to that customer. The 4th exercise will be adding a second service into our application. And so we'll link in a second service and then display data from that second service in our application as well. And then our last exercise, we will add a user menu to the application from an Mdk component project. And we'll talk more about what an Mdk component project is and how we link that in as part of the 5th exercise. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me go ahead and bring up the repository. So I've opened the repository in my browser, and on the first page of the README here, we've got the section for the kind of the prerequisite setup requirements. These are assumed to be in place here for those that are following along. The first one are the tutorials for getting a trial account and getting that enabled. So these exercises will work perfectly well on a trial or a free tier account. And then the second one here, the setup for the mobile development kit, is a existing tutorial that we have on the developer portal. And this covers getting access to mobile services, setting up the initial configuration for our Mdk app, which is basically just going into creating the application in mobile services that we'll be consuming, and then also setting up Business Application Studio with our development environment, our dev space, so that we can use the tooling to create our application. So I've gone ahead and set that up already for my environment, and we'll be using that here for the rest of the session. So let's go ahead and before we actually dive into the exercises though, I do want to go ahead and bring up the mobile services briefly. So if I jump over to mobile services, I've been signed out, of course. So let me sign back in. I am working in the trial account, so everything you're seeing here is a trial account. And I've gone ahead and created the SAP Mdk demo application. And I wanted to point out a couple things about this that'll be helpful for us or helpful for you as you're doing other applications in the future as well. The first is the mobile settings exchange. And if we go into the mobile settings exchange, this is where the passcode policy is defined for our application. And you'll see when we actually onboard our clients that our mobile clients that there is the option to have a passcode policy that defines a secondary passcode that's used when you launch the application to sign in. This is a passcode that the user sets on their device. It can also be done through biometrics if the device supports either fingerprints or Face ID in the case of like an iOS device. That can be enabled. It's enabled by default. And then by default, the initial password, the minimum passcode is length of 8, and we can drop that down to 5 at the minimum. I'm just going to make that 5 for our application today. And the other one is the lock timeout, and this defines how long the application can be idle in the background before the user will be required to enter a passcode again. So if they're switching between their Mdk application and email to check an email or something and come back, that lock timeout will play a factor in whether they have to enter that passcode again. If for some reason you don't want to use a passcode, like maybe during development, you can turn that policy off altogether just by unchecking that and saving that. But we'll go ahead and leave that turned on so that you can see the passcode screens. I'm going to go ahead and click on save, and it's going to save those settings, and now it's been updated, ready to go. And the second thing I wanted to touch on is the sample service. So for the bulk of the app, we're going to be relying on the sample service that's available here in mobile services. And one of the things about the sample service is as it's added to the application initially, there's not a lot of data there. And one of the things we're going to be displaying is our sales orders or sales orders for customers. Initially, there's only 10 that are created. If you want to create additional sales orders or purchase orders, you can do that here in the samples Odata ESPM feature. And so I can add in, maybe I'll just add in a couple, some additional orders here. So I'd add another 30 orders so that we may see some more data here when we're looking at the screens in the application. So with those two things done, we're all set from the mobile services side. We'll be relying heavily on the app update feature to deploy our application from Business Application Studio and then down to the client, as Jitendra was referring to earlier, which is that simplified lifecycle management. So as we deploy the changes out, we'll deploy them. We won't need to come into mobile services. We'll do all of that from Business Application Studio. So let's go ahead now and dive into the exercises here and get started. To try and make this easy so that you can kind of see the exercise as well as my screen as I'm going through this, I've got the exercises opened up here on the left-hand side, and then I'll be working through the right-hand side in Business Application Studio and the web view to look at the application. So we'll go ahead and jump in. The getting started exercise here is strictly here to get you to clone the repository into Business Application Studio. There's some artifacts we'll use in the future exercises that we want to have available. If I come into Business Application Studio, I've got my dev space created, and I'm here. I've got the welcome screen up. If for some reason you've closed the welcome screen, you can easily get back to that by going to the help menu and saying help welcome, or by going to the view and find command and searching for the welcome screen. So you can get back to it at any point in time just by one of those two methods if it's not already open. For this exercise here, we're going to go ahead and clone the repository. So I'm going to select the clone from Git option on the welcome screen, and it asks for that repository URL. So we can go ahead and I can copy the link from the exercise, or I can get it from the address bar, but I just want the root of that repository. If I paste that here into the box and hit enter, it's going to go ahead and clone that now, and it's added that into my workspace. I don't need to open that yet. We'll go ahead and see that after the first exercise here. So that's it for the getting started. We've now got the repository for the session cloned, and we're ready to dive into exercise 1. So exercise 1, we're going to create our application from a template. So we're going to rely, there's an existing tutorial, quick start tutorial that builds the application from the template, and then we'll use that as the basis for all the additional enhancements that we're going to apply throughout the rest of the hands-on session. So we can go ahead and open up the tutorial here. And the tutorial has 5 steps. The first is to create the project. We'll then talk about the structure just to get people familiar in case you haven't used Mdk before. We'll talk about how that works in the editor, as well as the structure of our application. We'll then deploy it because the application that we generate is ready to run. And then we'll onboard and run that in all 3 of our platforms. So the first step is to open our dev space, which we have open, and then click Start to create from the template. So when I click on Start, it's going to give me a choice of the types of projects that I can create. So you can see here are all the different template types that are for the different applications within Business Application Studio. We're of course working with an Mdk project, so we'll select that as our type and click on Start. The first step in the wizard is to select the type of template we want to use. We have 4 template types for Mdk applications. The empty template, which is just a shell of an application without any generated content. The base application, which is our the shell of the content, but with a connection to an existing service, but not generating any UI screens. The list detail, which will generate for each of the selected entities a list screen and a detail page for each of those, along with a menu. And then the final one, which is our CRUD, create, read, update, delete, which will generate everything from the list detail, along with add, edit pages, and a delete option for the different entities. We need to give our application a name, so we're going to call it Mdk app. The project name, you'll notice the application name and project name default. It defaults to the same. The project name is the folder that's created in our workspace to contain all of the Mdk metadata, and the application name is the internal name then for that application within the Mdk. The target client version, leave that at the default there because we'll be using the clients from the app stores. Those are the latest Mdk 6x clients, and so we'll just leave that for there. And we'll go ahead and click on Next. This next screen only shows up if your connection to the Cloud Foundry cockpit is timed out. So it looks like mine's timed out, so I need to sign in again. So I need to enter my email and my password again and click the login button. And once I've done that, I can select my org and space associated with my trial account. I need to do this because on this service configuration step, it's going to actually connect to mobile services and look for the list of applications, and it finds my Mdk application that we created in the requirements setup step. And from here, I can then also see the destinations that are available, and I'm going to use my sample service destination for this application. The sample service is a direct endpoint, so we don't need to worry about any pathing to sub-services on that. And we will do this as an offline application, so we can leave that checked as yes. And then the last step here is to decide on what entities we want to select. I should update this here, sorry. Which of the data collections we want to bring down for our application. So we'll use customers, products, purchase orders, and the sales orders. When I go ahead and click on Finish, it's going to go ahead and generate the application, and it's going to also open up the application in a workspace in Business Application Studio. Okay. On the left-hand side here in the Explorer pane, you now see the structure of our application. Here's my Mdk app folder. And then the structure of all the Mdk applications are the same, have the same top level structure. So I have a folder for actions, extensions, globals, I18N for internationalization, images, pages, rules, services, styles, and this web folder for the any web client specific content. All of this is controlled through the application.app, which is the entry point to my Mdk application. And if we expand out any of these folders, we'll see the different items underneath there. You can organize your metadata into folders. By default, the template, you can see created folders for each of the entities that we created and one for the service as well. We've got some common actions at the top level as well. How you organize your folders, that's kind of, you can organize them into folders, subfolders, depending upon your preferences. So we can see our actions. And with all of the metadata types, if I right click on a folder within at the top level or any of the subfolders, you'll see the different options at the bottom here for our Mdk actions that we can do for that particular metadata type. So in the case of actions, I can say new action, for example, and then that will bring up the wizard to allow us to create a new Mdk action and select from any of the action types that are defined within Mdk. And we'll be using that in our application exercises coming up. So the main three things that we look at are actions, rules, and pages. Our page folder, if we open that up here, for example, and I wanted to look at the customer list page, it's going to open the layout editor, which gives us the ability to, the visual editor, to drag and drop and bring controls onto our page. Because I'm running this on a small screen right now to keep the exercise open on the left, I'm going to go ahead and double click on that to hide the Explorer pane so that we can see, I'll be doing this throughout the exercises. And you can see here then I've got the control palette where I've got all the different controls, and I can just drag and drop controls onto the preview area in the middle, reorder them as needed, and then selecting any of the controls on the right-hand side brings up our properties for the controls where we can do our binding. We can use what's called the object browser, which is the link icon, or we can add items and look at them in here. We've got our properties, and we also have the events associated with that. So you may have one or more events associated with a control on the page where you need to assign something. And in the case of, like, for example, an on press, where I want to navigate somewhere else when the user selects a particular customer, I want to open up the detail page. And I can define that here as part of this events. And in the little three dots is our menu. And you can see here, I've got an option for jump to. You'll see this throughout the application where I can jump and navigate directly to that particular action or rule so that we can very quickly kind of trace through the application, see that customer list is going to call this a navigation action to open the customer detail page. If I want to see the customer detail page, I can use my jump to again to open up that detail page in the editor as well and take a look at that. And I can see here's the default page that was generated from the template. If we choose, we can go ahead and modify things as needed, or we can just go ahead and look at it from there. The other thing that is important to point out, if I take a look at the application.app, this is, as I mentioned earlier, was the starting point for our application because it defines what the initial pages that's opened up when the application starts. That's what's called, we call our main page, and the template generates a page called main as well. And then the other important things are some of the application lifecycle events, in particular the on launch, which defines what needs to happen when the app starts up. And we use this to initialize our connection to the data services, either the online service or the offline services. So here we've got an action to initialize our offline service, and I can jump to that action and see here that we've got our initialize action, which is going to bring down the data for those selected entities that I chose in my template and populate my offline database so that data is now available offline. All of the actions have what are called common action properties that allow us to define things like success and failure actions, what happens next. So you can chain actions together. You can have actions that call rules for the next step and vice versa. So in this case, my initialize action, once it's successful, is going to call a initialize success. It's going to pop up a toast message just saying that the application data service has been initialized. Similarly, if there was a failure, there'll be a failure message that displays, and then the application, once that's all loaded, that will then display on those appropriate actions will fire accordingly once as the app loads. The other two, I didn't mean to close that, that I wanted to mention are the on will update and on did update. These are especially useful when we're deploying to mobile services from app update on our mobile clients. The on will update is a rule or an action that can execute when the client detects that there is new metadata available and before it applies it on the client. So you can, you'll see the default is to just display a little pop-up message asking if they want to update or not. And then the on did update is kind of the equivalent of on launch when new metadata is loaded from app update. So in this case, we're going to call the same initialize action here to reinitialize after we've loaded the new metadata that we've deployed. And you'll see this as we're going through the different exercises and we're deploying out the different changes. And then lastly, we'll take just one quick look at our main page. And this is the starting point for our application. So when the app first launches, this is the page that we'll see. And by default, it's just a button menu with all the different entities so that we can drill into those default list and detail pages that were created. And we'll take a look at this in the actual client as we go forward here. So that's a quick look at the application. That's a quick look at the editor and how we can navigate through and modify our application as we are developing it. As I mentioned before, this is a running, ready to run application. So we can go ahead and just deploy this, and we do that in Business Application Studio by using the application.app. We're going to right click on that and we're going to choose our Mdk Deploy. This will prompt us for what type of deploy we want to do. We want to deploy to mobile services, to Cloud Foundry, which is for the web client, or both. You can also deploy the web client to a local run so that you can test just for the web client locally. Obviously, we don't have a mobile client in our browser, so we would need to deploy to mobile services to test on those types of devices. But you can run emulators and simulators as well to do testing. We're going to select for all of our deploys in these exercises, we'll use the mobile and cloud option. The first time I do the deploy, it's going to prompt me for some additional questions here, whether I want to include the source map. It's now going to first do the deploy to mobile services, and you'll see this doesn't take very long, just a few seconds. And then once that's done, it tells me the revision for that, and then it's going to prompt me for the information about my web deployment. It's going to ask me for a namespace and app name. We'll just use the default, and same thing with the versions. And it's now going to do the deploy to Cloud Foundry. This first time we're doing the web deploy will take a few minutes. And that's because it has to go ahead and set up all of the different components in the Cloud Foundry environment for our web application, the routes and everything else. But once this is done, the long deploy is just the first time. Subsequent deploys are significantly quicker and go very quick with just the metadata updates being pushed out to the web on those subsequent deploys. While that's running, let's talk about how we go ahead and onboard here for our clients. We're going to use the QR code to onboard to our mobile clients. And this QR code is used by the mobile clients to learn where they need to connect to. So this QR code has got the connection information for our application and mobile services so that we can use the generic client, which doesn't know that information up front, and we can provide it through the scanning of that QR code. Because the mobile deploy is already done, we can go ahead and onboard our clients now, and while this is running. All the deploys run in the background so that you can continue to do other work. While you're deploying, you don't need to wait for that to finish to necessarily do additional development. Obviously, to test, you will need to wait till the deployment is complete. So we'll go ahead and onboard our clients. So we're going to onboard for iOS, Android, and for the web. I'll start with the 2 mobile clients. I've got my devices here, and I'm mirroring my Android phone and my iOS, my iPhone here on the screen, so that you can see that these are live devices. So I'll go ahead, and I've already installed the client from the App Store and the Play Store onto the 2 devices, but I've not run it before. So this is the first time that I'm launching these. If I tap on that to launch on Android, the first thing we'll see is our license agreement. We just agree to that. And now we get the welcome screen. And the welcome screen is the starting point. And I've got 2 options there. I can scan because it doesn't know what it needs to connect to, or there's a demo mode where if you want to just play around with a sample app, you can do experiment, just kind of see how that would work without actually onboarding to a live system. But I'm going to go ahead and scan. And when I go to scan, obviously it's going to ask me to make sure I'm allowed to use the camera. But then it's going to look for the QR code. And that QR code we find we can get from Business Application Studio. If we open up the application.app, there's this option at the top for the application QR code, where if I click on that, it's going to ask me what app we want to show a QR code for, and we're going to select our demo app. And now I've got that QR code, and the URL scheme is already defaulted to the client. So if I go ahead and point my camera at the screen there, the scan was successful there. So I'll try and do that one on iOS better so you can see the scan actually. When I say continue, it's now going to take me to the login page. And so I can log in and enter my credentials. And because we had the passcode defined in mobile services, I'm now prompted for my passcode. And you can see here, it's looking for a minimum of 5 characters. And I'm going to use the ultra secure 12345 as my passcode. And I'm going to put it in a second time to confirm. And then because my phone also has biometrics available, I can choose to use that as well. So I will enable that. And then I'll scan my fingerprint just to confirm that. So the client starts up and it gives me a prompt that says it found a new metadata. And so what it's done is it's connected to mobile services and it's found the metadata that we deployed. And I'm going to go ahead and say, now I want to take that. So it's going to download that metadata. And now it's going to initialize my data store and bring down that data from the back end. And now I've got my application running here. And you can see here, I've got my menu page, the main page, which has got the different buttons. So if I click on customers, I can see my list of customers and I can scroll through those, or I can tap on one of those to view the detail. I've got the edit option up there at the top for edit and delete. And then obviously I can, if I go back here, I've got an option to create a new customer at the top. So that's just a real quick look at so there we go. We've got the app up and running live on my device. I'm going to do the same thing here for iOS. So I'm going to agree. We'll bring this over here so that I can do this. So when I go scan and say okay, and if I scan my QR code there, it found the QR code. And again, I'll need to log in with my username, okay? And put a passcode in, just like on the Android. And again, this iPhone has Face ID, so I can enable Face ID instead of having to enter my passcode. And just like with Android, it found the metadata in App Update. So I can go ahead and apply that onto my device, and it's going to now initialize just like Android did. So I'll pull up products here on Android. So you can see here that the app's been initialized, my data's been downloaded, and I take a look and I can see the same data side by side here between Android and iOS, again, drilling into details. I can see the same details that I would from Android as well. And it wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk about our third client, which is our web. So our web client here, once that web deploy finishes, anytime we do a web deploy, we'll get the option to open that up. So if I just click the button, it'll go ahead and open a browser tab and log me into the web client. And you'll see here, I get the same main menu page, look at customers, see my list of customers, drill into details. I could look at the products and see that same list of products, scroll through that list, drill in as well. So there's our initial template running on all three of our platforms. So that completes the first part of this exercise. So we'll jump back now. The next part, you'll notice remember when we opened this up, it opened it into a new workspace. And this workspace is only showing the one folder in our Business Application Studio dev environment. We're going to go ahead and open back to the projects folder. And so we're going to change our workspace back to the projects folder so we have easy access to the cloned repo as well. So I'm going to go ahead and say open workspace, select projects, and say OK. And then it's going to reload that. And I'll still have access to the same Mdk application and everything else in there, but I'll also now have access to the cloned repository. As you can see here, there's the cloned repository, and then there's also a web application factory, which is a folder that's generated when we're doing the web deploys. You can just kind of ignore that. That just gets updated and populated automatically during the deploy process. So at this point, if we bring back up our app, you can see here, I've got the same app. Everything's going to function exactly the same. One of the things about the default template that may or may not be beneficial is that we do what we call the default bindings as we try to bind to the service. It just does that alphabetically. So things like the list page may not display the best fields for your data. So you'll probably want to go in and tweak that. We're not going to cover that here in this exercise, but it's just a matter of you can go in and rebind the different fields to whatever data is appropriate for the different entities. But that's why you'll see some of the data that as we're looking at it in the app may not necessarily make sense from a list of products. For example, you might not see the product name even in there, but it's just the way the default binding works. So feel free to adjust that to your liking as you're doing the exercises. So that completes exercise 1. At this time, we're going to go ahead and dive right into exercise 2. So for exercise 2, we're going to take all the other exercises are going to build upon this first based application that we created. And we're going to go ahead and add the bottom navigation to our application. So instead of having our application display that main page with the menu of buttons, we're going to use the bottom navigation where we'll have across the bottom, we can have up to 5 tabs that give us the ability to have sections in our app and then easily switch between them from that will be persisted across all the different areas. So to start that, we're going to create the new page. We're going to add the tab items, and then we're going to define that new page to be the first page or the main page of our application. And then we'll redeploy and view that in the different clients. So let's get started. So the first exercise here under 2.1 is to create the page. So if we go to our pages folder, and we're just going to, at the top level, we're going to right click and say new Mdk page. This is going to bring up the wizard and ask us for what type of page we want to create. You can see the different page types here. We're going to use the bottom navigation page for this. So we're going to click on next. And then we need to give it a name. So we're going to call it overview. And we're just going to then click next. And then on the confirmation, we'll click finish. It's going to create the page and open that in the editor for us. And so you can see here, I've got it opens at the page level, and then I've got the controls that are applicable for this page. So I can only really add action bar and toolbar. And then I've got a caption. We don't want to display the caption, so we're going to blank that out because we're going to let the caption for the individual tabs display at the top there. And then at the bottom here, I've got my tab items, and if I click on that, you'll see that the properties updates to show my tabs for that default page. And we're going to go ahead and define that. This first one will be our customers. So if we look here under the items for the tab, I can expand that out, and you can see here that I can provide, for example, the caption that'll show on the button. We'll call that customers. We can give it an image, and these images are what we use the SAP UI5 icons. And so those icons are available in the Icon Explorer. So if I bring up that page, let me pull that up real quick. There's the SAP Icon Explorer, and there's all of these icons that you see here are available by default in the Mdk client. So you can use any of these for images, buttons, etc. In your Mdk apps. And if you find one you like, you can just click on it, and then it'll give you the string to use. So it's SAP icon : / and the name of that icon. You can use the copy link to just copy that and paste that into the Mdk editor when you're developing your app. So we've kind of pre-decided on icons that we're going to use for this. So I'll just go ahead and type that in, SAP icon, and this one is called customer. We'll give our tab a name. And then the other important thing for our tab is what page is it going to open? So for this, we're just going to go ahead, and since we already have a customer list page, we're just going to display that page. So I can click on the three dots to bring up the pop-up menu, and I'm going to use my object browser. And the object browser shows me all the different metadata objects that I can select and use. In this particular case, I'm going to bind to my customer list page, which happens to be right here. I need to double click on it to set it into the expression box. And we'll see how that works later on when we're doing data binding. But we want to make sure that we double click on that and then click on OK. Otherwise, it will just it won't actually save it into the field here. So we can see here on our page to open that we've now got our customer list page defined for this tab. And now we can go ahead and we're going to do the same thing with additional tabs. So when I'm working with the tabs, this box is a little small. So we do have a pop-out where I can bring up the items, and I'm going to go ahead and add in 3 more tabs right now. So I clicked 3 more times, and then I'm going to go ahead and populate the information for them. So my next one here is my products tab. So if I expand this out, so the caption here will be products. And then again, we'll put in an image, SAP icon / product. We'll name our tab. And again, for the page to open, we'll use the object browser to go find our products page. We can either just scroll down to find it, or we also have the search where if I just start typing products, it'll filter down, and you can see then I can find very quickly the product list page, double click on that, and click on OK. That's all we need for that second tab. And now we'll repeat that process here for my purchase orders tab, POs. And you'll notice I'm using the My Sales Order icon for this one. You know, there's no right or wrong necessarily to which icon you're using if it makes sense for your application. So name it, and then again for the purchase orders page, this time I want the purchase order headers. I have both purchase order headers and line items, but we want the headers, so we'll select the headers list page, and I'll double click that again and say OK. And then for my last one, that's going to be my sales orders. So we'll go ahead and do that one as well, sales orders. And then just like with the other ones, we're going to bind that, and I'll just scroll down to the sales order headers, list page. Okay, I've set all of that. I can click on OK, and now you can see here I've got the 4 tabs available on the preview area. The next step we need to do is to make this our main page for the application. So we'll go ahead and open up our application.app. And for the main page, I'm now going to go ahead and use the object browser to go find my overview page. So this is the new overview page that we just created. I'm setting that as the main page for my application. And now we're ready to go ahead and deploy and test. So deploying is the same process again. I'm going to right click on application.app and select Mdk Deploy and deploy to both mobile and cloud. And you'll see it go through the deploy first to mobile. That process takes pretty much the same every time, pretty quick. It's already done. And now it's going to do the deploy to Cloud Foundry for the web. And this will go much quicker this time because all we're doing is deploying the metadata. So we don't need to, that process is already done as well. So you can see they're very quick to deploy my changes and test that out. If we take a look at that, we'll start in the web. Click the button here to open that up. It's going to open a tab and relog me in. And you can see here now I've got my bottom navigation defined for my customers, products, POs, and sales orders. Clicking on the tab just jumps me across to the different ones. It is important to note that the web is an online only, so we don't have offline data on the web, but it's the same, that initialize action can be used for initializing for both online or offline use. Mobile obviously will do the offline, and then, but you can also build online applications as well with your mobile. But the web is always online, so you can see here, here's all my data, scroll through it. It's very easy now. This then persists, so as I drill into a detail page, I always have this bottom navigation available to very easily switch over to sales orders, for example, and drill in. And when I come back to that tab, I'm exactly where I left off. So it's remembering the different positions for the different sections across the bottom navigation. If I want to take a look at this on my mobile, if I bring back up my phones, we're going to go ahead and just swipe closed and relaunch these. And so it picks up the changes. Every time we launch, it looks for whether or not there are new metadata. So I'm going to sign in here with my fingerprint instead of typing in a password. And on this one, I'll use Face ID. So you can see there, I've got the update now. This is that on will update action that we talked about briefly, and that's prompting me to say, do I want to take this change? I'm going to go ahead and say okay on both of these. And you'll notice now it's changed and switched to the bottom navigation view. So just like with the web, I've got the tabs across the bottom. I can switch between the different tabs and look at the data, drill down into the pages, just like we did on the web client. So very easily, we were able to add the bottom navigation as a new global navigation style to our application to break that up into sections which are easily accessible by our users. So that completes exercise 2. And then our next exercise we'll jump right into and keep going. So for our next exercise, we're going to enhance that customer detail page. So instead of showing just a list of information, we're going to break it up into tabs and add both a address page and a sales orders page for the customer sales orders. And then of course we'll set all that up with the navigations and then redeploy and test again. Similar to last time, if I jump back into my editor, we're going to go ahead and create a new page, but this time when we create the page, we're going to create it underneath the customers folder. So I'm going to right click on my customers folder and select new page. And when the wizard comes up. This time, instead of the bottom navigation, I'm going to use the tabs page. So I'm going to select the tabs page, click on next, enter a name, customers tab, and click finish. And when that opens here in the editor, you can see I've got a header area and then my tabs area. So for the header area, we can put in a header, and we're going to use the profile header for this one. And the profile header is nice because it lets us display information like contact information, and also includes an area where we can set up links, action buttons, to either phone or email that particular person, where it will switch the device to the device phone app or email app to directly from Mdk. So I've dragged the profile header to my page. I meant to change the caption here, so I forgot to do that. So if I want to change the caption, I can always click on that to bring back up the page level properties. And so for this page, this is going to be my customer detail page. So I'm going to change that heading. Then I can click back to the profile header there. And the first thing we're going to do then is, now that we've got it, is bind it to my data. So I've got, here's all the different fields that are available in that profile header, and we're going to bind those. So we're not going to use the description or the detail image because I don't have a picture for my contact. For the headline, we're going to set that to the user's name, first, last name. So I'm going to use my object browser again. And this is where you can see here now it's showing my Odata objects that I'm going to bind to. And I can see all the different properties for the different entities in my service. For my customer entity, you'll see that I've got an address, and then I also have duplicates of those fields. This is because the sample service has a complex type for address, just to have that as part of the sample. So you can bind to complex types as well as to simple properties. But in this case, we want the first and last name of our user. So when I double click on first name, it puts it in there. If I double click last name, you'll notice that it just replaces that value. So what we want to do is we want to double click to select the first name, and then we can put in other static text as well. So I'm going to just put a space, and then I'm going to go last name, and I'm going to select it, but instead of double clicking, I'm going to click insert. And so I can build up a string here, and I could also put in other text as well if I wanted static text. But in this case, I want the first name space last name. And when I say OK, then I get the two fields concatenated together for that particular property. We're not going to use the subhead as well, but we do want to use, oops, I clicked off of it. I do want to use these activity items. So for the activity items, I want to click this plus sign to add an activity item. And you can see the activity item is one of 5 different types. We want to use the phone, which will take the phone number and start the phone app. So I'm going to bind that. In this case, I'm going to go back into the object browser, and I'm going to bind that to the phone number. So I'm going to double click on phone number, and I'm going to say OK. So I've created that activity button to call the customer. And I can also add a second one, and this time we're going to use email. And we'll go ahead then and bind that to the email address for that customer as well. So now I've added a phone and an email in the header. Now we're going to go ahead and set up the tabs. So for this first one, there's one tab by default. So if I click on the tab, and similar to the bottom navigation tabs, I have the same type of properties. So I'm going to specify a caption, address, and an icon. Give it a name. And then for the page to open this time, I don't have an address page already. So we're going to go ahead and add a brand new page. So I'm going to use the create a page option, and it's going to ask me for what type what I want to create. In this case, it's a page, and then where do I want to put it? And so I could put it by default at the root of the pages folder, or I'm going to actually put it underneath my customers folder. So I'm going to select pages customers. And when I say OK, it's now going to bring up the wizard, just like if I had selected it from the Explorer there. And for this one, we want to use the section page. This is like our generic page that allows us to have multiple sections of content, UI controls together. So we'll select that and give it a name. And then I'll click Next and Finish. And the new page is now going to open up, and that new page is also automatically populated into that page to open field on the tab. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and use what's called we're going to display the address. So that's all those address fields. We're going to display a bunch of fields. We're going to do that with what's called a static key value. So I'm going to open up my container section for controls and drag and drop the static key value onto my page. This is it's a responsive control. So on a phone, it's only going to be one column, but as you'll see on the web, it's multi-column, and by default, it sets it up as 2 columns. And then I need to put this is the container for it, and then I need to put the actual key value items into the container. So I drag in the first key value item. And for the first one, for all these key value items, there's a label and then a value. So for this first one, I'm going to call it address. And I'm going to go ahead and bind that to my house number and street. So the way the data is set up in the sample service is I have 2 properties, one for the actual house number. So again, I'm going to double click that first one, put a space, and then select the street and insert it to concatenate those 2 together as house number and street. So very easily I did that first one. Now we're going to repeat the process. We've got additional elements for our address, so we can just drag and drop as many key value items as we want in here. And I'm going to put a total of 6 into my field. And for the rest of these, I'm just going to bind them as per the sample screenshot there. So the next one I'm going to do is city. And we'll bind that to the city property. And then we'll do postal code. Next one's our country region. And the field in the actual service is just called country, so that's why you'll see it. The binding there is based on the actual service there. The next one here is for the phone. We have the phone number linked into the profile header, but that just is a button to actually call the number. If we actually want to just display the phone number, I'll put an extra field in here for that as well, for phone number, as well as for email address. So the last one we'll do here is email. So you can see very quickly, I can go ahead and just through the visual editor, drag and drop those controls, do my data binding, and I'm ready to go. Just for fun, we're going to add another section to this page. So we're going to add another static key value section. This time I'm only going to have 1 column because I'm going to display the address as a formatted address block like you might typically see it. So we're going to just put in 1 key value item. And this is going to be my formatted address here. And for this one, instead of using a data binding, I could do some data binding, but I'm going to actually use a rule. So we're going to add a new rule. So you can see, just like with the pages, I'm going to do an add rule, put that in my customers folder underneath rules. And this is going to be my format address rule. Next and finish to open up the rule. And it opens up the rule as a JavaScript rule, so I can just write my JavaScript rule. For this one, we've gone ahead and given you the rule pre-created. So I'm just going to select the rule from the exercise, and I'm going to copy and paste that into my rule editor, or into my editor here in Business Application Studio. So you can see here in this rule, I've got a helper function that was created just to check if the value is empty or not. And what the rule is going to do is it's going to check to see if we have a house number, If we have a house number, it's going to add the house number and the street. If we have at least city, state, or postal code, it's going to start populating those in as a second line. So it's going to put a carriage return new line character to separate that. So we'll have multiple lines, and then it's going to add in the city, and then the postal code, and then the country as well. So if I have a country code, it'll put that into the block, and then it's just going to return that that new string, which is my formatted address. Obviously, you could enhance this to do whatever formatting or logic you want for your particular rule. And you can see here then that that's the formatted address then has a reference to the rule. And when we actually deploy this, we'll see that on the devices. So that's the end of this page. So this is the end of my address page. So now we want to add another tab. So if I go back to my tab page, just like with my bottom navigation, I can add another one. And for this one, this is going to be my sales orders. So I'll put in my sales order icon, name the page, the tab, sales orders. And again, for the page to open, I don't have a sales orders. I do have a sales orders page, but that's displaying all sales orders. On this particular page, I want to display just sales orders for this for the selected customer. So I'm going to actually create a new page and still put that under customers. And like before, I'm going to choose the section page type. And I'm going to call this my customers sales orders. Click on next and finish. And this time, instead of using the key value fields, I want to create a list. So this list is going to be, I don't know how many orders that a particular customer may have. So I'm going to use what we call our compound controls, and I'm going to use the object table. And the object table will bind to an entity set and dynamically add a row for every record in that result set. So for the object table here, I'm going to go ahead and specify the target, which is the data source for this list. And so I'm going to select my service. And in this case, when I go to select the entity set, when I click the drop down, you'll notice that I have not only the actual entity sets, but I have what's called these Odata read link references. And these are, if you're not familiar with Odata, there's the concept of a navigation property in Odata where I can have a reference to another entity set. In this particular case, there's a link for the selected record, in particular selected customer in this case. There's a sales order property which says, show me just the sales orders for this customer. So instead of selecting sales orders headers as the source for this list, I'm going to use this navigation link to display that. I'm also going to specify the query options, and the query options allow me to do things like additional filtering, expanding out additional navigation properties, selecting a subset of fields, or in this case, I'm going to use the order by to sort the list so it's consistently sorted. I'm going to use sort by created at, but I want to sort it in reverse order. So once I check it, I can check the arrow to change the direction. And when I click the descending now, it adds the descending operator to my order by clause. So now I've defined the source for my list. I now need to just go ahead and do the binding. So just like before, when I was binding the other properties, I'm going to bind all the properties in my object table. So for the description, I'm going to clear that out. Same thing with the image. For the footnote, I want to display the sales order ID. So I'm going to go ahead and use my object browser to find the sales order ID and double click on that. Preserve icon stack spacing. I'm going to set that to false. For an object cell, we can display up to 3 icons on the left-hand side. And if I'm not using them, I can just turn that off to cause that space to collapse down. And then for the progress indicator, I'm going to go ahead and blank that out as well. And then we'll go ahead and specify again the rest of these properties. So for my status field, I want to specify the lifecycle status name. For the subhead, we'll clear that out. And for the next two here, my substatus and title, we're going to use some of the Mdk formatting functions. And so Mdk has a number of built-in formatting functions. The first one here that we're using is the currency one. And I'm just going to copy and paste this, and I'll put it in here under the substatus. And then I'll open it up in the object browser so you can see that. So I've got a currency function where it takes the currency amount and the currency code, and then it's got some additional optional formatting parameters. And it will then display the currency in the format for my region. So in the US here, we'd have the currency symbol on the left, followed by the number. In other regions of the world, you may have the number followed by the symbol at the end. You may use commas versus periods for the separators. And so all of that gets handled through this formatting function, just by specifying the amount and the currency code for that. It uses the device regional settings to then determine how to actually display it on the screen. So I'll go ahead and say okay to that. There is, in the exercise, there's links to provide a little more information, as well as links to the documentation for that. And then similarly for the order date, for the title, I'm going to display the order date. So here again, I'm going to put in a function. In this case, I'm going to have the string order date with a colon followed by the date, the created at date, formatted into what's called a medium format, where it shows month, day, year. And then again, this is going to be regionalized for the settings of my device. Okay, so now that we've defined those properties, and as I mentioned here, here's a little bit more information about those two formatting functions, as well as links to the documentation on that. The last property we're going to set for my list here is what we call the empty section. So in the event that the customer has no orders, rather than just showing a blank page, when there are no rows for a particular list, I can display a string or something. So I can say, for example, no customer orders. So that way the user doesn't think that there's a problem, but they see that there just aren't any orders for that particular customer. The last thing we want to do before we set this up on this page is when I have an order, I want to be able to look at the details for that. So for this particular object table, I'm going to go ahead and go over to the Events tab. And in the on-press event, I'm going to define an action. I'm not going to define, I'm going to reuse the action for, navigating to the sales order details. So if I look for sales order, we've got navigation actions. And so here's one to navigate to from my order header to the detail page. So I'll just reuse that action and say, okay. And now my second tab is complete and ready to go. The last thing we need to do before we deploy this is link this in to our customer. So by default, the template from our customer list page, if I open the customer list page, this is also an object table. When I click on it, there's an on-press action which is going to navigate to, if I do my jump to, I can open this action and see that it's opening the default customer detail page. So we're going to change this action to, instead of opening the customer detail page, we want to open our new customer tab page. So I'm just going to replace the page in the existing navigation action. Now we're ready to go. I'm going to just clean up my workspace here, close all those down, and deploy the application. So just like before, right-click on application.app and select deploy, and then choose mobile and cloud for my deployment target. wait a few seconds. It's going to go ahead and quickly do that. While that's doing, I'll go ahead and swipe my apps closed on my phones so that they're ready to relaunch. And we'll bring that back up here. So you can see the mobile services has been deployed. So let's go ahead and relaunch the clients. Oops, I got to point it at my face. And then sign in with my biometric. Okay. And like before, the application's initialized, and then I see the on-will update prompt. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. The app's going to go ahead and reload, but you'll notice that there really isn't anything different yet because all we've done is the changes are at the customer detail level. So if I select a particular customer, I can see that I now have my new tab page. So I've got my header, the profile header there with the 2 tabs. And then again, I can scroll within that page area, and you can see here I've got the individual fields, and I've also got my formatted address. And as I mentioned, we added the action buttons here on the profile header. I've got the phone and email buttons. So if I tap on that phone, it's going to ask whether it wants me to call that particular number. So in this case, it brought up on iOS, it did a prompt. I'm going to cancel that. And then on Android, it switched over to the phone app. So I can just go ahead and switch back to my mobile development kit app. On the sales orders side, if I click on the sales orders, I should see, in this particular case, I have no customer orders. Don't know why that's not showing. Interesting. So I have the empty thing. I'm not sure what happened on Android there, but we'll go ahead and try and find a customer with some orders now. So this is where those additional orders that we added come into play. I don't know who has orders, so here's one. James Field has some orders, or I'm sorry, Isabel has orders. So I've got one order here. You can see the order there. I can tap on that and bring up the order details. So here's the sales order header details. Navigate back. If I want to go find another customer, I'm just randomly picking a customer at this point to see if they've got some orders. Because there's not a lot of data in there, I'm kind of hit or miss, but it does illustrate the empty section there. I relaunched my Android client here. Let's go pull up Isabel. And you can see there's the order for Isabel. If we go back and, pick up that other one there. So not quite sure what happened, but that's the fun of live demos. So there we've got our pages working in the mobile devices. Let's go ahead and look at this on the web as well. Okay. And so let's just click on one, and you can see here now I've got my tabs for my address, my formatted address, as well as my sales orders. And of course, this one doesn't, have any either. If I go down to see if I can, pull up Isabel. Nope. Yep, there's my sales order for Isabel. And again, I can drill into the details. So just like the mobile, you can see very easily, we've only defined this once, but we're using that same metadata on all 3 of the platforms. Okay. All right, that concludes exercise 3. Our next exercise here is we're going to add our second service. So let's jump right into that. Hopefully we'll have enough time to get through the rest of this. This one's a little longer because we're going to go ahead and do create a new service, add that as a destination in the BTP cockpit, as well as in mobile services. And then we're going to add the second service to the Mdk application and create the initialization action for that. Then lastly, we'll go ahead and add a new tab at the bottom. So we'll have a 5th tab for that, and then we'll deploy and test. For this exercise, we've pre-created a second OData service. It runs as an in-memory service, which means that there's nothing persisted to disk. It only any changes are persisted only until you restart the service. So if the service is stopped and restarted, it resets back to the initial state here with just a couple of records in it. There's two entity sets in there. There's a risk set and a mitigation set, and they're linked together. And so to get this started, we're going to actually deploy this out. So in our exercise 4 folder, so this is where we wanted to have the session repo cloned in. So if I expand the session repo under exercises, exercise 4, you can see there's my TechEd service, and it's ready to deploy. All we need to do is right click and say deploy the Mta Archive, and it's going to go ahead and deploy that now to my BTP space. So it's going to deploy that into my dev space. This will take a couple of minutes to do the deploy, and once that's done, we'll see a processed finished message in the output here, and we'll then be ready to move on to the next step. So this is going to go ahead and do that deploy. It'll take just a few minutes. And then we'll move on. While we're doing that, the service here has, as I mentioned, those two entity sets, and that will deploy this with the route, get it staged up, and we're going to then use that URL. We'll take a look at that briefly in the browser there. Let me go ahead while that's getting deployed. I'm sure this is timed out as well, so let me refresh this to get logged back in as it's starting that up. Get my dock out of the way again. So it's starting up the application now, and that'll be done in just a few more seconds, and then we'll be ready to, I should also log back into mobile services for the additional steps. Okay. So the process is finished. I can see that. So if I come back to my BTP cockpit and go into my dev space, I'll now see another service here, my TechEd service. Selecting that will bring up the details for that, and in particular, it gives me the application route, and this is the URL I need to access to view the service. Because this is just a simple test service, there's no authentication for it, and as I mentioned, it just has those two entity sets in there. But we do need the URL for that, so we're going to copy the URL here. And now we're going to go ahead and we'll jump back to, in just a second, we'll jump back to our editor here. Because what we're going to do is we're going to add that as a new destination. And so again, we've created a template for that destination called TechEdService.properties. So in Business Application Studio, we're going to go ahead and right click on that and download it. That'll download it to my computer here, because I'm going to go back to the BTP cockpit and go back to the trial sub-account. And then I'm going to go to destination. So under connectivity, if this isn't expanded out, go ahead and click on it and then select destinations. And we're going to add this in as a new destination. So we're going to import it. So when I click on import, I'm going to select that TechEd service properties file I just downloaded. And for the URL, I need to paste that in. So I'm going to paste in that URL. You'll see that there's a validation error because until I select off of the field, it then will validate it. Now that I've done that, I can click the Use Default Trust Store and click Save. Now that that's been created, I can test that briefly, clicking on Check Connection, and if I see a 200 response for this service, that's exactly what I want to see. It's ready to go. So I very quickly added that in BTP. Now we're going to add it in mobile services. So I'm going to jump back over to mobile services, go into my Mdk app, and under connectivity, we're going to create another destination. So I'm going to add another destination to my application. I'm going to name it the same, TechEd service. And instead of putting in the URL here, I'm actually going to connect it up to that BTP destination. So I'm going to select the SAP destination service, and here it then gives me the option to select the cloud destination name. So I'll click the pop-up and select the TechEd service that we just created. So now mobile services will talk to that BTP destination to get to the back end. I'm going to go ahead and click next and next through because there's no additional information I need to specify for this. and click Finish. And at this point, it's now created that new destination in Mobile Services. And since there were no other things, now we're ready to go ahead and add this into our Mdk application. So switching back to my Business Application Studio, first thing we're going to do is add it as a service. So under the Services folder here, it's collapsing this back down, you can see I've got the sample service. I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose New Service. And here's where we're going to go ahead now and specify the name of the service. I'm going to call it TechEd Service. And we're going to pick the new destination. And this time, instead of picking sample service, we're picking the TechEd service. Like before, we'll load it up as an offline service. And I'm going to click the Check Service button to verify that Business Application Studio can retrieve the metadata from that service. Since that was successful, I'm ready to continue. I can click Next. It'll show me the metadata. This is all the entities in that service, and I'll go ahead and click on Finish. It does throw a warning here, but we can just go ahead and ignore that. And for now that this is created, I don't need to do anything else in here. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now we're ready to go ahead and create our initialization action. So just like we initialize our sample service, we need to initialize the new one. So under my Actions folder, I'm actually going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it TechEd Service. And in that new folder, I'm going to create a new Mdk action. And this is where I'm going to create my initialize action. So this is of type Odata action. So when I click Next, it gives me the option to enter a name, initialize, and select the type. And you can see here's all the different Odata action types or subtypes that are available. So we're going to use the initialize action. And most importantly, I want to make sure that I select the new service here because I don't want to reinitialize the sample service again. I want to initialize the TechEd service. So when I click on Next, it gives me the option to set up my defining requests. And these defining requests are the data that it's going to bring down for the offline. I'm going to go ahead and add 2 rows in here, and I'm going to bring down the mitigation set and the risk set. I can use the object browser to select that, and you'll notice that it's filtered to the new service. So I'm going to select mitigation set and double click on that and click OK. And I'm just going to use that same name. So I'm just going to copy paste it into the name field and repeat that process for my risks set. Okay. So I've defined those 2 requests. Go ahead and click Next and Finish, and it's going to open this up now in my editor. One of the things we're going to set now is these common action properties. So in the common action properties, there's 3 things we're going to set. First is the what we call the action result, and this is a label that's used to reference the results of this action in subsequent actions or rules. So we're going to call it a NIT. And in this case, for the success and failure, we're just going to reuse the same, the generic initialize success and failure message that we have for the other service. So I'm going to open up the object browser and type in success and select the initialize offline success message. Excuse me. And for the failure, do the same thing. Search for failure and do the initialize offline failure message. And that's it. So now that I've defined my new initialize action, I need to chain that together with the existing one. So I can close this. Now I'm going to go back and open up the initialize offline action that was created from the template. And you can see here it's using the same property for init. And here, instead of calling the success message that we looked at before, I'm going to replace this with the new initialize action. So I'm going to link in the initialize for the second service as part of this. So now once it initializes the sample service, it'll initialize my TechEd service and then display the message. So those are now chained together. There was one other step that I wanted to add. I meant to add it. It's not in the exercises, but we'll update that after the session here. If I open up my TechEd service initialize action, under common action properties, there's a show activity indicator. I'm going to go ahead and set this to true, and this will that's what shows the message with the spinner on the screen while that's doing the initialization of the download. So we'll turn that on to true. I wanted that to be done, and we missed that step in the exercise, so we'll get that corrected. So now I've created the action, I've linked it in, and it's ready to go. So now, once the app runs, I'll have that new data available. We can now build a page to display it. So if we go back to our overview page, so under pages, and go find the overview page and open that up. I'm going to go ahead and add in a fifth tab. So just to make it easier to view, I'll hide the Explorer pane there. I've got the 4 right now. So if I click on that, I'm going to add a fifth one. I've now got a fifth item. And we're going to specify that as our risks. And for the image there, we'll use another icon. And like before, when we were creating, doing our other tabs, we don't have a risks page because this is a new service. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new page. I'm just going to put it under the pages folder. We're going to select section page again, and we're going to call it risks. We'll click next and finish to finish the creation, and it'll open that up now in the editor. Like the risks, we want to display a list of data. So we'll use the same, oops, I selected the wrong type there. So let me go ahead and correct that. So let me go delete that risks page and recreate it. Clicked went a little too fast there. So select section, call it risks, and say next and finish. All right, so now I've got my risks page. It's a section table page, and we're going to use that same object table control type. So we'll drag and drop that onto our page. And this time when we bind the target, we're going to bind that to the new service. So we're going to select, we now have the 2 services to choose from. We're going to select our TechEd service and our risks set. And for our query options, we're going to expand that mitigation reference. So there's the mitigation navigation property in my service that lets me see the mitigation associated to this risk. So we can display that data together with the risk information on the list. So I'm going to select that and say OK. And now we're ready to bind the data fields. So we're going to go ahead and again, we're going to clear out the description in the image. For the footnote, now when I expand in the object browser here, you can see because I've got the $expand, it knows to show me all the properties associated with the mitigation. And we're going to use, for the footnote, we're going to display the mitigation timeline with a dash and then the mitigation description. So I'm going to select timeline, dash, description. And you'll see it references it as the navigation / property. We don't need to worry about icon spacing. We don't need a progress indicator. For the status though, we'll display criticality. Let me scroll this back so you can see. So I'll bind that to the risks criticality. For the subhead, we'll use the description of the risk. And then for the substatus, we'll use the impact as a formatted currency value again. This time, we don't, in this particular service, I don't have, all the impact values are in euros, so I can hard code that currency code. because I don't have it as a data field in my service. So if I wanted to update my service, I could add that as well as a separate field, but I can just hard code that as a euro. And then the last is the title, and we have a title field in our risk, so we'll go ahead and bind it to that. Like before, we'll go ahead and set the empty section to indicate that we have no risks. If in the event that we deleted the data out, no risks. Okay, and we're done. So now that I've created that new page, that page is associated to my overview page here. So on my overview page under tab 4, we added the risk, and it references that risks page that we just created. We're now ready to go ahead and do the deploy. So we'll go ahead and right click and say deploy. Again, deploying to mobile and cloud. And again, while this is deploying, I'll go ahead and swipe my apps closed real quick and bring those up on the screen. So that's been deployed, so we can launch both those apps. Go ahead and say update now. Okay, go ahead and say okay. And you now see that I've got a risks tab down there at the bottom. I can select risks on both the devices now that the service is initialized, and you can see that risk information. Same thing on the web, just like before. Let's launch into the web, and we've got the 5th tab for my risks, and go ahead and click on that, and I see that data. So here, very easily, we were able to consume that second service, add that into our application, and display that data on my as a 5th tab in my bottom navigation. Okay. So that completes exercise 4. We've got one exercise left, and we should be able to get that in the remaining time here. So let's continue forward into exercise 5. For exercise 5, we're going to add a user menu to our application. And this user menu is common functions that would apply to pretty much any of our applications. And so this has been, we've pre-created this as what we call an Mdk component application. And a component application is a set of functionality that can be added into an application either as overrides to existing definitions or additional functionality to an existing application. And it's created in a separate folder as it looks just like a regular Mdk application, but we define a linkage between what's called the base application, in this case our Mdk app, and our component application, which is my user menu component. So for this user menu component, let me expand this out so it's a little easier to see here. It's going to display a pop-up menu that gives us up to 6 different options. And so it's going to give us a sync option for an offline application. So if it's iOS or Android, this option will show, but it won't show on the web browser. To call the sync action to sync data with the backend, upload any local changes that we have done, and download any changes from the backend as a delta. So it doesn't download all the data every time, it just downloads the changes. A support page where we can have an easy way for our users to contact support if they're having problems with the application. And then on the mobile devices as well, it gives options for the logging, log levels and the log, and you can then upload that to mobile services as well. An option for the mobile devices to check for updates. So rather than having to swipe the app closed, we can add an option in here to just check if there's new updates. From an app update perspective, the client does automatically check for definitions as it's running on a regular basis. But if we don't want to wait for that timer to trigger to check for updates, especially during development, it's really handy to have an option just to say check for updates. In a production application, you're not deploying app updates that frequently, so letting the user check the app automatically check and just pop up when it detects it, or giving the user an option to check is certainly an easy thing to do. And then the about page, just to give us some information about the application, the user, the device, and information. And then an option to reset. So if we want to reset back to the welcome screen and re-onboard from scratch, we can do that. Or if the mobile clients are running in multi-user mode, there's an option then to log out without resetting everything so that a different user could log in. The process that we're going to go through here is we're going to start with copying that component application. So in my exercises repository here under exercise 5, there is a user menu component folder, and we want to copy this to my workspace. So I want to select it, and but to copy it, I need to use the browser copy menu. So I can't right click it and select it. I need to click on it and go to my browser menu and say copy. And then to paste it, I want to go ahead and collapse down so I can see some white space, and I need to unselect everything, because if I just paste it now, it's going to paste it into the currently selected folder. So I'm going to just right click and then click off to unselect everything in my Explorer, and again use my browser menu and say paste. And so as you can see there, it created the user menu component, and it added that into my workspace as a new folder there. The next step is because I have multiple applications that are, when they deploy, they're going to be deployed together. I'm going to set up what we call the reference application. So I'm going to expand my user menu component and open the application.app for the component app. You can see here that there's the name of the application is called user menu. And at the bottom of the application.app, there's a setting called reference applications. This is only used in the editor. This is not used at runtime. And this allows the editor to know what apps are related so that it can, in the object browser, display those metadata objects when you're selecting something from both applications. So I'm going to go ahead and click the plus sign. It's going to go ahead and search and look through the workspace and say, well, what is the reference application for this? So this user menu component is going to refer to the Mdk app, which is our base app. So I'm going to double click that and say, okay. And I'm going to go ahead now and repeat that process for the Mdk app. So I'm going to open the Mdk app application.app, and under reference applications down here, set the reference for this to my user component. Now you'll notice it finds it twice because it's searching my workspace. It finds it once under the exercises and once as where I copied it. So we want to select the one that I copied and say okay. Now that I've set up those references, we can go ahead and link the two together. So when we do the actual deploy, we use a component integration metadata file to define that relationship. And that component, the SIM file, as we call it for short, gets created in our base application, which in this case is my Mdk app. So I'm going to right click on the application.app in my Mdk app, and I want to say new SIM. And I'm going to create a new SIM file. So it's going to start the wizard up. Be patient, wait for the wizard to show none under the project name because it's going to look through the workspace to find the Mdk apps. And we want to select the user menu component, not the one in the repo, but the top level one. We're going to select the application name for that. And we can leave the SIM file name as the default. Go ahead and click next and finish to create that SIM file. So now I have the SIM editor, and you can see here that I've got a list of integration points. And these integration points define the objects that I want to copy from the component to override something in the base app. So I'm going to override, for example, the on-will update rule. So I'm going to select the plus and click on rule. And for the source, I'm going to select the on-will update, but I want to select the one from the component, and I'm going to target that to the on-will update of the base app. So I can set those, and I can click the check mark to make that save. And so now I've got that defined. So when the app is deployed now, it's going to deploy the metadata for both the base app and the component app. And it's going to take and process all of these integration points to copy the source to the target, so that when this then is run, you'll see that generic on-will update message will be replaced with the one from our component application. The way that I created this user menu component is it's set up to be generic. So the next exercise here is to configure it. And so because it needs to know certain things about the application, like, for example, the name and things of the app to display on the About page, the contact information for the support, etc., those were all set up as globals. And my globals, if I expand the user menu component globals, you can see I've got a list of globals here. And the first one we're going to set is our application name. And this is just a friendly name that we display on the About page. So I can give a friendly name of my application here. We're just going to call this TechEd 2021 Dev 162 application. So I can create that, populate that, and then also optionally I can set a version. This version will display on the About page as well. If I wanted to give it a version number, maybe 101, that will display there. And then the third global we need to configure here is the sync option. So the sync option we need to know when I select the sync menu option, what action to call in the base app to actually do the upload and download. So in this particular case, we're just going to upload and download the sample service stuff because we're only viewing the other. But we're going to go ahead and reuse that action that exists already in the main in the base app. So on our main page that we're not using anymore, the template created, if you may have noticed at the bottom there were two buttons, one for logout and one for sync. So we're going to go ahead and open that up. And I'm going to select my sync button, and I'm going to go to the events tab, and I'm going to copy that action name in this case. So I'm going to copy this action, and then I'm going to go back to my editor and go to this sync action name global. And instead of a not configured action message, I'm going to actually have it call that sync started action. So I'm going to paste that in. So now that's set. The other things we set in my component are my support contact information. So under the support folder, I've got 3 more globals for email, FaceTime, and phone. And these will be displayed on the support page. And I'm just going to leave the default values in here. Obviously, you'd want to set this to the appropriate contact information for your organization. So we're going to set those I don't need to change. I can go ahead and close all that out. That's all the configuration I need to do for this, for the configuration of the component. But the last thing I need to do is actually display it somewhere in my application. So we're going to display that on our customer list page. So back in my Mdk app, which is our base app, I'm going to open up that customer list page. And we're going to go ahead and add that as an action bar button up here at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that over there. We added that button. We're going to set the properties for that. We're going to give it a caption, user menu, give it an icon, SAP icon, customer, and give it a name, user menu. And then the last thing we need to do is set up the event that when the user presses on it, what are we going to do? So again, here we're going to use the object browser, and I'm going to search for user menu. You'll notice that it found my user menu application, and if I expand that out, I'm going to use the user menu popover action. So it's going to call this action in my component application when I press on that button. That's all I need to do at this point. I'm ready to redeploy. So we're going to go back one last deploy cycle. When I do the deploy, I'm deploying from the base app. So I'm going to right click on application.app and select deploy and select mobile and cloud. And we've got just enough time to see that deploy and take a look at that. So it's doing the deploy to mobile services. I'll go ahead and bring those up real quick. Oops, forgot to sign in. All right, and then one last update cycle. So you can see now that on the iOS device, I've now got a customer menu button up here at the top on both the devices. When I tap on that, we'll get our pop-up menu of all of our options. So we can sync, we can go to the support page, contact support, look at the log information, do an about. So I can see the user, device, the title, the name. Looks like it didn't take there. And same thing here on Android, the same exact options. I can check for updates. It's already using the latest version. And then look at that also on the web. So, we are running out of time, but you can see here on the web, I only have the 3 options versus all the options because I don't have, that they don't apply for that. The sync and stuff don't apply in the online on the web. So, all right, so we just made it. That's the end of our exercise. To continue your learning, we do recommend visiting the additional support and learning resources links that are on the initial page there. Visit us in the community, ask some questions, and we also have a host of additional Mdk tutorials to walk you through additional things, features, functions, all the way from scratch to more advanced topics beyond that. So to wrap up here, we hope you had a great time. Hope you learned some good information about the mobile development kit, and we look forward to seeing you in additional sessions here at TechEd. Thanks for attending.